Attention, attention. All right, who wants to do push-ups? All right. Excuse me. Hello, everybody. We're starting. All right. Let everybody get in their seats. Also, sir, right there, I want to meet you after. Right here?
LaShawn.
Yes, LaShawn, thank you. I read your profile. I like it. All right, so my name is Patti Krater, and I've been in the podcast space since 2007, taking it old school. Not putting my age out there, but you can kind of figure it out as we go along the story here. But I started podcasting in 2007 when my husband Ken was deployed in Iraq. And I didn't even realize it was a podcast when I used the platform at the beginning. It was a platform that I could use to communicate with military spouses. During that deployment, it was a really tough time. We lost 9 guys the month that I started podcasting, and the reason that we started using this little platform was to connect the spouses with one another. That deployment was god-awful. We lost 28 friends in war, over 100 were severely wounded in war, and some of the spouses started moving back home to their families for extra support. So we needed something to use to kind of continue to communicate with one another. So we used this little thing, and it was called Talk Shoe Radio. We used that for a couple of years. The podcast we actually called our little group was Christian Military Wives. Then I realized, this is actually a podcast, and it's actually growing quite large because the military spouses, they were moving to other states, and they started telling their friends who were military spouses, and it grew pretty large. My husband ended up getting wounded in 2007 towards the end of that deployment, and he came back a whole different person. I continued, using that platform to kind of connect with the spouses, but my life was changing, my story was changing, and in 2010, he medically retired from the military, and I started a podcast called Voice of Warriors. We actually used that to bridge military communities and civilian communities together because it was important for our military communities to be able to transition into civilian life. So our panel today is about just that, bridging military communities and civilian communities together. Nowadays, my podcast is largely military focused. However, I've opened that up to first responders. I have a huge interest in international policy because I realized, that our wars are not just here in America, right? They're started somewhere else. So I talk a lot about that. Today we have a great panel. I'm very excited to have 2 Travises and Shay with me on the panel today. I almost said on the show. And we're going to go ahead and just have each of you tell a little bit about yourselves, where you came from. And we're going to go ahead and start with Travis Johnson.
How much time do we have here?
We have 50 minutes total.
55 minutes, and we're already, better hurry this up. Travis Johnson served 22 years in the Navy, did 11 years enlisted, 11 years on the dark side. Ended up starting my first podcast, Nonprofit Architect podcast, while I was deployed to Bahrain for a year. We took off a hit number 3 in the U.S. within 3 months of launching, which was just outrageous. I had no idea what I was doing then. Fun fact, I still had no idea what I was doing. But I've got a second show, Titan Evolution Podcast, and we ended up starting our own podcast agency, Podcast Titan. Co-founder of the Veteran Podcast Awards and the Veteran Podcast Network, which we've recently merged both of those entities into Parade Deck, and Andrew's here somewhere in the hallway apparently. Looking forward to seeing that grow and doing the Veteran Podcast Awards again later this year.
Thank you, Travis. I'm going to hand it down to Shay.
Sure. I'm Shay Sparks. I am the daughter of a veteran, and I am the CEO of Sparks of Fire International. I'm a fearless living coach, a speaker, author, and my podcast is The Shay Sparks Show. It started off as I talked to entrepreneurs who were my friends who had gone through a rough patch. And then that rough patch sparked them into investing in themselves, and that investment overflowed onto their life, their business, and their community. And I was like, wow, that's a really great story. People don't share the muck and the yuck stories, right? They share oh, I'm so great, this is what I've done. And I thought, what nuggets can we learn when we share wisdom from the muck and the yuck? And that's how my podcast started. And then those of you who were on the last session, I talked about how I met James at another podcast conference, and I was coaching transforming trauma into treasure, and he said, have you considered working with the veteran community? I was like, wow, that's funny, I meet them everywhere I go. And so now it's really moved into where I speak with business and military leaders on what it means to invest in people. And I am just honored to be here, part of Military CreatorCon.
Thank you, Shay. Appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you all today. My name is Travis, the other Travis Partington. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I did the Hawk missile system, and one of my lieutenants is here in the audience today. I feel so honored. Hawk is a missile system that you fire at targets 30, 40 miles away. It's a lot of fun, and it's gone now forever, but Hawkers never die. I was doing some guest hosting on an AM station in Taunton, Massachusetts, WVBF, and I got the idea that, I'm in a hard place in my life. There's a lot of, hopeless people out there, myself one of them at the time. I want to do something, and radio time, as you all know, is extremely expensive and logistical time consuming. So I had the idea to create a podcast. I call that podcast Oscar Mike Radio. Oscar Mike, for all of us being, we're on the move, we're on mission. And it's grown over the years to allow me to do so many other things in media, like this conference right here, speaking engagements, TV work, and other vocal work. And it's just been a real blessing to tell stories of my fellow veterans who've served, those who are serving now, and then what we're kind of talking about, civilians who advocate for us. So it's just great to be here. Great to see a lot of guests on my show in the audience and one on the panel. So stay tuned for more.
Thank you. So I actually have a few questions for the panelists. And the first question is going to go to Travis Johnson. Your story is very interesting to me. I know a little bit about your background, and I want you to go a little bit deeper with the people in attendance here to tell them, when you were in the military, you started your podcast, but you really felt led to do something in the civilian world. That's what I want you to talk a little bit about and touch on the importance of that.
So the first show I started, the Nonprofit Architect, the idea, I had been doing some nonprofit work, served on a couple of boards, and I know that I was in Bahrain, and if I didn't find something productive to do, I was going to get myself in trouble, you know what I mean? So I knew some things, we had raised a bunch of money, but I didn't know everything. So I brought on different leaders in the nonprofit space, leaders in the business world, and the kind of goal was to get them to teach about the thing that they do, the thing that their magic was. There wasn't any shows. I did some research. There was no shows in the nonprofit space that were actually teaching anything. It was some industry people just kind of, yucking it up and having a good time. And there was a nonprofit highlight show, but there was no one actually teaching people how to do this stuff better. And so we did something like 170 episodes, and kind of ended up in the military space. When you start doing something and you're a veteran, you kind of end up in the military space, and really were people asking questions, wanting to know how to start nonprofits. And then it kind of changed. I got to a point where you get stuck and you're not sure if you're going to continue, you're not sure if you're going to do what you're going to do. And I asked my audience, I was like, well, what do you guys want from me? And the overwhelming response is, we want to know how to start a podcast. You've been doing it, you've been taking off, you've been doing all those great things. We want to know how you do what you do. And that really allowed me to serve in a better capacity. I could do some nonprofit stuff, but it really wasn't my magic. It took time to figure out what my magic was, what is it that people wanted from me, and it really allowed me to expand not only to serve veterans, but to serve people at large.
Thank you for that, Travis. We actually have Travis Partington down here. Oh, Travis Partington. And your story is really interesting to me as well, because, I mean, if you know any Marines,
There's a couple I know.
I mean, you're pretty hardcore, right? So how did you decide, I know you mentioned a little bit about Oscar Mike Radio, but why is it important to you to connect with communities besides military? Can you give us some more information about that?
Sure, thank you. And before I answer the question, it's a two-part answer. Are there any civilians in the audience right now? Raise your hands. Stick them up there. Come on now. Why? Thank you. Now, why am I doing that? Why am I doing that? It underscores why we're having this conversation. The fact of the matter is, if you take the feel-good out of it, the fact of the matter is, right now, 1% of U.S. citizens actually serve in the military. And every day we lose more and more veterans due to veterans passing from World War II and the Korean War and Vietnam War. Vietnam War veterans are actually passing at a faster rate than their Korean War and World War II veterans had. So it stands to reason that we must, as a veteran community, find a way to do what we're doing right now, bridging that gap with you all, if there is a gap, and understanding what each other wants, like Travis just did with his podcast. So I just want to say I appreciate the fact that you're here. I appreciate the fact that you've taken time out of your day to come and listen to us and learn from us. So we appreciate you and we're happy you're here. So thank you. To get back to the answer to your question is, when I started Oscar Mike Radio, right off the bat, it was a civilian who said, you know what, you can do this. I went to Massasoit Community College. I had done some radio work. It was like, how do you start a podcast? And 10 years ago, there's nothing like it is now. And a guy by the name of Keith Hayes was sitting there talking about how he was using Audacity, the butt tool, broadcast using this tool, that's what it's called, and other tools to make his podcast. And I'm like, I could do this. And I kind of had the idea for Oscar Mike Radio and what it is, and the goal of my show is to tell the veteran's story, or in this case, the person who advocates for us veterans, to tell their story and connect them with other people. And he's like, you can do this, you have to prepare, you gotta do this, this, and this, and get started. So right away, my success and my longevity has been built on the fact that the civilian took the time to invest in me. And that's happened time and time again over the years, where it's been a civilian saying, you know what, I like your show, I want to support it, or you know what, I don't use this example. I just did a speech for Leader Bank in Boston, bigger bank in the Northeast. I'm from the Boston area. And one of my followers is like, hey, we have this thing, Travis, where we're trying to bring in people to talk about, the veteran experience. I showed them your show. They all liked it. They want to talk with you. And I gave the speech. But again, every one of those people were civilians. They'd never served. If you hand them an M16 or an M9 Glock, Beretta, excuse me, they wouldn't know what it is, but they found value in what the veteran experience was, and they wanted to share in that. So by doing Oscar Mike Radio, it's allowed me to bridge those gaps and see those happen organically and holistically. And to Travis's point, I'll just piggyback on that. There is the aspect of service. He calls it service. I call it value. Whatever podcast you're doing, whether you're a veteran or not, if your podcast brings value to the subject matter, to the guest, to the listener, you're never going to go wrong.
So I have another question.
Oh.
I'll let you keep the mic down there. You're going to need it. So I have another question for the audience. So in the military community, there are a lot of acronyms, right? So like TBI, PTSD, even BCGs, right? I'm curious, the civilians, have you heard these acronyms? TBI, PTSD, other acronyms maybe, and the veteran community. I have the question for you. Obviously, I'm assuming most of you know these acronyms, right? So one of the things that I found really useful is when I'm talking on a podcast to remember that not just military veterans tune into military podcasts. So you may be a military podcaster, and there are people out there listening who have never been in the military community. And so one of the things I want to point out is it's really important to kind of explain to the listeners some of these acronyms and things like that, because they're really thirsty to learn. I mean, we have a couple civilians in here now. Shay Sparks, she talks about overcoming fear. many of my military veteran friends, they talk about some really tough topics. Or some of the veterans I've had on my show, I've had to pause the show and let some of these men, they will break down and just cry because their stories are so tough. And it is getting over a fear of it to an extent. And then the civilians who are listening, I have had many tell me they're even fearful to talk to military veterans about some of the tougher topics. So Shay, if you could kind of tell us, how do you work with people on overcoming these fears so that they're able to be a good guest, whether they're civilian or military, and talk about these things?
Yes, well, thank you for that. And I love the pointing out the acronyms, because that was me. I was like, all right, so please share what that means, because I have no clue. I'm a civilian member. And so I was so thankful when my guest would actually explain what that SOS just meant, or what other letters and numbers together meant. So thank you for pointing that out. So when I was attending this other podcast conference and I met James and I said I transform trauma into treasure, he said, have you considered working with veterans? After our conversation, I literally walked around the rest of the conference looking up at God. I believe in God, and going, God, really? Is this what you want me to do? You want me to work with veterans? Is that the doors you keep opening for me? Because I meet them literally every conversation I have, every networking event, I'm meeting them. And as I started to dive in deeper to my mission, at the time I was helping abused women get out of abusive relationships and really helping them find their own voice and transform what they've been to into a gift. And I thought, what if we looked at trauma as an experience that is an opportunity for growth rather than trauma as an opportunity to hold you back? And I thought about not just the veteran world, but anyone who's gone through any kind of trauma, is that the common denominator is the word trauma. That's the bridge. And it doesn't matter if it's a traumatic brain injury, or they now have PTSD, or it's someone that experienced some sort of car accident. Our brains actually receive trauma all the same. And I started doing research, started diving into literally how our brains process trauma and how that reacts in fear later on. And I'm a certified fearless living coach because of that. I didn't even know that was the path I was on. It just, a door opened, I walked through, and now here I am knowing more about the brain than I ever thought, because it's how we all experience. It's something we experience as trauma. Our brain says, nope, don't go there. Like you're driving in a car and you go to slam on your brakes, and if you have a passenger, you may stick your hand out to stop them, right? Right? I'm gonna stop you, Travis, from falling off the chair.
Thank you.
And so that's what our brain does. It's to protect us. And there's a lot of people in the world, and I'm not going to categorize them as military or veterans or even a certain gender, but they don't want to talk about that thing they're afraid of.
And I want to
Right?
make sure, though, that I think I might know that there's probably a veteran or two in the room thinking, yeah, my trauma was a lot different. Like, I'm
Right.
getting shot at, my friend was beheaded in front of me, whatever. I mean,
Right.
so I don't think that that's what she is mentioning when she thinks that everybody's trauma is the same. What you're mentioning is the body responses, right?
Yes. The mechanics, the chemical reactions in our brain is the same. It just might show up completely different. There are complex post-traumatic disorders. There's so many layers to trauma, but it was just that one common denominator. It was like, wow, there is something so similar that none of us talk about. And so that's one thing that I really wanted to build that bridge on my podcast, was kind of show how this muck and the yuck that I was talking to entrepreneurs about was happening to everyone. And we may not go into the deep dive of being shot at or, having to pull someone out of a dangerous situation, but they still experience something, right? And what I learned from just having these conversations was when you put a word out there, like the word veteran, people have a preconceived notion. And I wanted to remove that preconceived notion and show the person. And show that we are all human and have a heart and have a brain that is reacting to what we've been through.
Thank you. And I know I saw Adam Bird back there. He's a good friend, and I seen him shaking his head like, oh gosh, there goes Patti. But really, I think that civilians sometimes don't understand there's some very tragic things, and they're fearful to bring it up. If I wasn't kind of stuck in the middle of, yes, I'm a civilian, but my husband was wounded in war, and I happen to help coach some veterans out of some very dark spaces, I wouldn't understand it. So I do appreciate you kind of explaining that, and I think it's important.
So thank you for asking.
Yeah. So Travis, one of the things that we had talked about in the hallway was interesting to me. Would you mind telling our audience here about your childhood just a tiny bit, because it really kind of takes you back before you were in the military, some of the things that you experienced, maybe not, you don't have to go into huge detail, but it was your upbringing that made you want to do better and get out, and talk about that a little.
Yeah, so thanks for opening up that PTSD for me, Patti.
High five.
High five. Here we go. So this is something that I end up talking about quite a bit. So I'm gonna rattle off some things that I'm gonna say them really quick. And I say them really quick on purpose, right? So growing up, before I graduated high school, I moved 36 times.
Whoa.
I was in 12 schools, 6 states, 5 different foster homes, 8 total. Both my mom and sister tried to kill me. I was homeless. And then I turned 16 and moved out of my house. And I turned 17 and graduated high school. 18 joined the military. 19 got married. And when you go through that just mountain of stuff, it creates some kind of person, right? When you're in that framework, I've got a sister, and she is completely different from me. She's in jail right now. She's done so many things. She deserves to be there. I wish it wasn't true, but it's the way it is. And when we go through these experiences that we go through, even though it might not feel like it, we have the choice whether we want to, do the framework that was shown to us, that our parents had, that was our growing up, or you have the choice to reject that and make a life for yourself. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't have money for college. We have the entrepreneur's dream. We had 7 streams of income. Well, they were all like social assistance, right? They were all food stamps and welfare and child support and alimony and all of those things. And I was in a small town, like 12,000 people. Like, how am I going to make a life for myself? And the military offered me this olive branch because they didn't care about my backhood. They didn't care about my family name. I know that if I showed up with a great attitude, willing to serve, that I could get through anything. That's how I started my nonprofit journey. That's how I started in my podcast. That's how I started anything that I've ever done. You never know how it's going to turn out. You have this idea of what it might be, what you could start, but you don't ever really know what it's going to be. I thought the nonprofit architect was going to be the thing that I was going to do, and it made a lot of sense, and it provided a lot of value, but it turned out that was just a stepping stone to build the skills I needed to really help people in podcasting, something that we always find that thing that we just kind of understand for no reason, like, hey Travis, you really get this, and you need to help other people do it better. We had Richard Kaufman. He's a semi-famous veteran podcaster, and I had been a guest on his show before I ended up starting my own show, talking about, I think I was doing financial planning at the time. We helped 400 families pay off $6 million in debt. It was a pretty fun little period of my life, but I was a guest on his show. I started doing my show, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but the downloads were coming in. I was posting downloads and having fun with it, and I hit like 18,000 pretty early, and he called me up. He's like, hey man, what are you doing? I'm in Bahrain, like drinking a bourbon, like, what are you doing? He's like, no. He's like, wait, what are you doing with this podcasting? And I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, dude, you have 3 times as many downloads as I have. I was like, you've been doing this for like 3 years. And he's like, yeah, but I'm just not getting the traction. He's like, can you talk with me about it? And we worked through what he was doing and how often he was posting, and it was all the details that aren't very sexy and exciting to talk about. And he just posted this week, and he tagged me in something that we keep up. He went over 2.5 million downloads. after taking a little bit of advice, understanding that he might not have been doing something quite right, something that I had figured out, great mentors and reading and just kind of understanding how it worked. And we're able to take those experiences, we're able to take those things, and we're able to make something better. We're able to, if you watch the last panel, we're able to create. And, just like Shay, I'm a believer in one of the first things that God let us know about himself is that he's a creator and that we're made in his image. We're made to create, we're made to build, we're made to connect. And when you start doing those things and you go back to how I started, you show up with a great attitude, willing to serve, you can do anything.
Thank you for sharing that. And the moral of that story is before you were in the military, you were a civilian, right? And we all go through a lot of things in life to build us, or we can use it for our better, or you can let it do you in. You have two choices, really. What choice will you take? I am curious in the audience, how many are all of you podcasters, first of all? How many, so you're not a podcaster? No. Are you considering starting your own podcast? Just curious? No? Oh, interesting. Okay, that's interesting. All right, and then let's break right here for a second and see, does anybody have any questions yet as we go along? Go ahead.
If we veterans build these connections with civilians, what does the future of veterans advocacy look like to you all?
Does anybody want to tackle this? I always have an answer, but.
Well, Travis J is in alphabetical order.
Before Travis P, absolutely.
Exactly.
And somehow after Shay.
Well, just
the double S here. What I think is going to happen is it's going to make the conversations a lot easier. When we realize just how similar that we are, it's going to change the conversation. Like when I got stationed overseas the first time, only bad news makes it over the ocean, right? So I was walking into a Muslim country and I thought all these preconceived notions, but once I got there, I realized, I don't know if you all know this, there's families over there. And there's people that care about their kids and care about work. And it's the same when you cross that veteran-civilian divide, is we had this time of service, whether it was 1 day or 22 years or however long, and we were dedicated to that thing. Civilians are dedicated very much to their lives and their families and the people that they care about in their communities. I don't think the divide is as big as we want to pretend that it is.
Thank you, Travis. For me, I used my podcast a lot to advocate for the health care of our veterans, the care at the VA, for example. As you all have heard in the media, it's not always amazing care at the VA. However, over the years of podcasting and working, trying to build bridges to the VA, and actually being a caregiver of somebody who was wounded in war and who helped start the National VA Caregiver Program, podcasts helped a lot, because sometimes, VA workers, they didn't know what was going on once in a while, and then they would hear it and they're like, oh snap, we better fix it. And then the community members as well. When Ken first was wounded in war, and after he medically retired, we went back home to Saginaw, Michigan, and I felt alone. Nobody knew what the heck we went through. How do you explain some of the things that Ken had seen or done, or all the loss that we had in our lives? And so I would go sit at the memorial all by myself, the veteran memorial, as a spouse, not even a veteran. And I would just sit there, and man, I just remember some of the veterans coming over to the memorial also and just kind of sitting there, and we all got to know each other. And I had so many of those guys on my show just to talk about these things. So,
Will you repeat the question?
Just asking what the future of veteran advocacy is going to look like as we partner with the civilian community.
I thought that, I just was like, wait, did I lose it? So I really feel like what we've been kind of talking about throughout the day is in-person meetings. The coming together as a community to get to know the person, so that then the civilian can then advocate. can be the advocate, because what they're doing is learning what's really important. Just like Travis mentioned about the family. You know, I'm mentioning about how our brains, our bodies are reacting to things. Like, we're coming together, we're building communities. This podcast conference, the Military Creator Con, is a community. My podcast producer and I are building a community to really come together so that you're advocating for each other, military, civilian, and building that bridge.
Thank you for the question. For me, I'll use the VA as the basis for my answer. And in my case, the VA literally put me back together again. 3 years ago, I couldn't walk. I just couldn't. I'll get into that story later, but the VA is like, hey, we know what you're trying to do. We'll put you back together again if you do the work. And it was really great to take my show, Oscar Mike Radio, and talk about that relationship between the VA care providers and myself, and let other veterans know that, hey, it's not all doom and gloom. There's people there that care. And then the other benefit of that is the civilians who listen to my show, a lot of them wives and girlfriends who have to get us men to the doctor. I don't like to go. You know, it's like, well, I heard this podcast and this guy said he had a good experience. You're going. He's like, dude, you're killing me. I'm like, I can't tell a lie, man. It's been great care, and you should go. Something as simple as that, to allow the bridges to go and to build a foundation of trust and care, goes a long way. And whether you have a strictly military veterans podcast or do something else, to your point, Shay, we're telling a story. You know, Travis just told his story, and connect with all of us here, because we've all been through our, you know, trials and tribulations and been better for it. And again, you know, Travis, when I had him on my show, that was one of the reasons why, is this pathway resilience that people need to be reminded of. So it allows us to go further together, to answer your question.
Can I do a follow-up to Travis Partington?
Yes.
Can you talk about your TV show and how the muster and how that connects
I'll
to
do that
military
later. I'll do that
advocacy?
later. Yeah, I'll do that later.
All right, does anybody have, these two microphones, does anybody else have any questions before we hit the next round? No? Okay. All right, so actually going into websites and social media, things like that, you, Travis Johnson, you have the Veteran Podcast Awards. So tell us about that a little bit more in detail. How is that important?
My friend Shane from Broken Jarhead podcast, we had connected a couple of years ago. He reached out to me. We got to talking, really liked each other's stories, really wanted to do something good, something that was a little bit more impactful. He's like, hey, I bought this website, what do you think? And he bought VeteranPodcastAwards.com. I was like, I think you should start it and I should host it. And he's like, done. Like, he's a back-end guy, loves being behind the scenes, making the magic happen. And I do like to have a microphone in my hand or in the vicinity. That's one of the things I do. But when you look at the podcast space at large, there really isn't anything out there that's veteran specific. You can't go on Apple, you can go hit the hobbies or you can hit the murder section, but you can't hit a veteran section to find out what veterans are, what veteran voices are, and we have something to say. Everyone on this stage has very successful shows, and largely due in part because there's not other things feeding our community. So when we actually start something, we need to get a little bit of recognition. We need a little bit of support. Shay talked about wanting to stop her show just about every day. She's like, should I keep doing this? You know, Margot shared earlier, she's like, about once a month. I'm like, do I want to really? We need that support. We need that encouragement. We need to know that when we share these stories, as wonderful or as difficult as they may be, we need that little encouragement to keep going every now and then. And that's one of the ways that we wanted to showcase that, by having an award show and saying, hey, look, we're doing some amazing things and you can check it out here.
Thank you. So I have a question for civilians in the room. If you wouldn't mind, what drew you to want to come in here today to check out MilCon? Would anybody mind answering that? What was the draw there?
Yep. Well, I have a, excuse me, I have a military technology podcast, and it's through an association that I work for, and for years I've been trying to, our association deals with military operations, and so we have a lot of veterans in our association. I've been trying to bring in, from an advocacy perspective, more work at the community level with veterans and the families. It hasn't worked from an association perspective, but I'd like to use our podcast as a way of connecting, making partnerships with other podcasts and other efforts out there to kind of build up that veteran attention to veterans' concerns, because I have a lot of guests on my show that have PTSD and stuff like that, and we talk about things, we touch on it, but we don't get too much into it. So I'm here to kind of meet other people in this space to see what opportunities there are to connect and partner so that we can kind of bridge that gap that we have from an advocacy standpoint, because I think it's just important to make sure that you're not just focused on one small aspect of military life.
Thank you for sharing that, and you guys make sure you connect with them. What's your name? Ken, okay.
Hey, man,
Make
talk
sure
to me when you're done.
Yeah, make sure you connect. Anybody else? Here we go. This woman up here.
Well, I'm not a military or a veteran, but I've been working with the military for 18 years because I was a military contractor. My podcast is specifically about soft skills, like interviewing folks and teaching people about how to apply specific skills. And the reason is because a lot of my guests have been are veteran military, and a lot of I have like David Marquet or Ricciardini and others who are, a lot of those lessons that I want to communicate through the podcast are from veterans and military that they have learned, that they have a lot to provide, and my audience is basically either from military or military, so that's the reason, and coming to this big fest of, the only reason I'm here is because I feel more connected to this community because of I've been working with the military, and because of all the lessons that I've learned from the military community as well.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. All right, so just for that example, you can see we're in Orlando, right? It's not exactly that easy to come here, sometimes if you're not local or whatever. But these two people already found you all, right? You military. So imagine how easy it is for somebody that's a civilian to find your show and to listen to your show and to care about your show. One of the things that I will offer, I don't know why I'm doing this because I already have a big workload, but if anybody needs any mentorship, any guidance, who has a podcast, I don't mind doing it. I usually offer courses and all that stuff. It's totally free for you all. So let me know if I can do anything for you. I was able to grow my podcast from like 6 to 9 wives at Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, to millions of listeners. I'm on 17 radio stations, et cetera, et cetera. And I want the people on our panel here to kind of tell anybody in the audience, what do you have to offer? Why should people tune into you? Why should they connect with you?
Why should you tune into my show? I think you're going to tune into my show, and I have a very wide swath of listeners and guests with different topics. And some people like that, some people don't. But the thing is somebody finds something about my show that is for them, that resonates with them. And then they get curious, they get hooked. And they say, you know what, well, if I learned about how the Air Force works, well, then how's the Navy work? How's the Marine Corps work? Oh, you had this Coast Guard guy on who did this. Or, I came from here and I'm going to there, and this person's doing the same thing. So you can get like a master class of people who are doing the thing now in their own way and see them progress and grow with them. Guests on my show who are in this audience, I've seen you all come, 4, 5, 6 years ago, start your thing. I mean, Mike Starr is a perfect example of that, the barbecue rub back there. When I interviewed him, he was starting out in, his business. And now he is internationally known for how good his spice is. And I can sit there and tell you, hey, you're having trouble. You're having trouble keeping motivated, keeping inspired, keeping that momentum going. Well, here's an example of somebody just listening to this show who's done it. And they'll come back to me and say, wow, I feel like I have a kinship with that person. So if you can maintain that with whatever you're doing, you're going to add value to what you're talking about. And I think that's how I summarize my show.
That's a great point. Great point. Go ahead.
Repeat the question. Because it was such a great answer. I was so focused.
Why should
Why should you listen?
Why should people listen to your show or connect with you? Why? What is the reason?
Well, for me, it's about, kind of goes back to that fear. So I feel like we all have three voices. We have an inner voice, we have a business voice, and we have a legacy voice. Our inner voice is that fear. Is it going to stop us, or is it going to, can we rewire it so it propels us forward? How are we moving in fear, or are we moving in freedom? Number one. Number two, our business voice is how are we creating a business by what is authentically aligned with who we are and how we show up in the world. Our soft skills, like we talked about, how are we doing that? And then our legacy voice is literally what we're doing here. Our podcast is our legacy. Every conversation we have is our legacy. One of the questions I ask every single guest is, what is your legacy? What do you want to be remembered for? And when every person tells me what they want to be remembered for, more than almost every single one of them, I go, you're living that right now. So you are an example of you're living your legacy. Why you should connect with me is because I love helping people. I love connecting with other people. I love connecting people to other people. As Travis, I've connected him to so many people. So, connect with me, and if I can help in any way and connect you to the right person, I will.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know. I don't know what that answer is. People come into my sphere for all sorts of different reasons, and it always seems that whatever the reason they came into my world is never the reason they needed to be there. Come to me for podcast advice or financial advice or, want to do something better, and it almost always seems that there's some secondary underlying reason that people end up talking to me. It's I love connecting with people. I love helping people get to their goals. I love just really finding out what makes a person spark. What's that thing that really gets you excited? So I'll talk for 3 hours till I finally hit it and be like, oh, there it was. That's the thing. Tell me more. Oh, about that? You want to know about that? Yes. I want to know about that. I want to know what makes you light up, and I want to figure out how to help you get there. And I don't know what that looks like for everybody. Everyone's got it just a little bit different. But I want to connect with you and learn more about you.
Thank you. So we don't have very much time, but I am curious because I wasn't here earlier. Did you all get to introduce yourselves real quick and just say 1 or 2 sentences about yourself? Did you get to do that?
No, we didn't do that.
Let's do that. I think that's
sure.
so important. At every conference I've been to over the last 17 years, networking is very important.
My name is Jeff Aldridge. I'm a 10-year military veteran. I'm a podcaster, audio engineer, and I work for Guitar Center Professional. Could sell any podcaster equipment.
Thank you. And just pass it around.
Yeah, no worries. Hey, good morning, everybody. Eric Hummel, 25 years military, started enlisted Navy, bubblehead. Got my commission in the Air Force, fine arts degree, makes sense. Currently give tours of Arlington National Cemetery. Wrote a book, like to share it with you folks. It's called The Losing Game, How to Lose a War and Fail Veterans. It's a romantic comedy. Don't mind it.
I want it. My name is Steve Hudson. I'm the founder and CEO of AI Ready Veteran. It's based off a book that I co-wrote, Integrating AI into Businesses. But what we've done is we've created a platform for military to transition into the civilian world. And you've seen it. We've just partnered. I just got a contract with Wounded Warrior. They're using our platform on their for their warriors to use our platform to help their veterans transition. So, and happy to talk to anybody.
Go first.
I'm LaShawn. Dr. Russ Barnes, U.S. Air Force, 27-year veteran, retired as a colonel in 2009. Started Sistro Solutions because I never wanted to work for anybody ever again.
Amen.
And I do strategy development with small business owners in the pre-profitability stage. I've been coming to podcasts since we started. I've known Chris Kremitzos forever, and I remember when he said, hey, there's this thing called podcasting.
One second. And then I want to say, so Chris Kremitzos said the first person he told me as I was transitioning to reach out to was Russ.
Eric Coop, I'm a retired Navy, retired 3 years ago, 20-year career, and I haven't figured out what I want to do when I grow up yet.
Hey, Tony Bozy, recently retired Air Force, retired as the first sergeant, was aircraft maintainer for the rest of the career. I'm in the kind of messy middle, as my buddy Adam had pointed out the other day. Serial entrepreneur, I got a lot of stuff going on. I'm under contract to buy a business in Jacksonville. I've got a children's book in draft that I'm writing with my son, and a spice brand that I'm trying to work on getting launched that's gonna help fight veteran homelessness. So just a peek into the craziness, but that's me.
Hey, I'm Mama Margot. I'm a podcast host of Military Murder podcast. You guys heard me talk. I'm a single mom, 3 girls. They're 3, 6, and 8. So I had dealt with that this morning. It was crazy to get here. I got 2 puppies just recently because I don't need any more work. And I'm actually a reservist. I've been in the military for 15 years. I was on active duty for 11 years, and I've been in the reserve for 4. So.
My name is Adam Peters, 13 years Army. I'm the host of the Strategic Veteran Podcast, and I'm actually trying to unfuck the transition for all veterans.
Okay.
Good luck.
Sean Welsh, been doing the VetaSource podcast for the last 2.5 years, and currently we're in the process of making the conversion to turn the podcast as well as some additional things into a nonprofit, which will launch hopefully here in about 3 months. So, and I also double as Andrew's bodyguard.
I'm Sean's best friend. I call him for all feedback, and I'm not afraid anymore. Is he mad at me? I'm Andrew, Marine Corps veteran, founder of ParadeDeck.com. We help podcasters, influencers, and content creators in the military veteran community with distribution, promotion, and monetization. So any of those 3 you need, come talk to me.
All right.
Hey everybody, Enrique Acosta Gonzalez. I'm the host of Developing the Leader Within podcast. 26 years Navy, 7-time author, yada, yada, yada. But connect with me on LinkedIn. I love to.
Hi, my name's Aaron Gibson. I run a show called Aaron Gibson's Soul Man Live. I'm an ex-veteran, Canadian Forces ex-veteran of 3PP CLI. Started a late-night mental health talk show to break down the walls on stigmas, and that reaching out with post-military, any kind of mental health scenario, that you have the ability to reach out once you achieve that happiness in your world, that you can move forward. Passing the torch.
Hey everyone, Teresa Drag, the Major Drag, worked with Travis in Hawk, and he's a big reason why I'm here. I've done a lot of stuff both in and after I retired. Interesting note about the military and civilian stuff together. One of the ways that Travis and I reconnected was through his podcasting, but then also through conventions, sci-fi convention out west, which has a military track, which I didn't know existed in sci-fi. And that's a lot of connecting military and civilian over the subtopic of sci-fi, which is kind of fun. And I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up.
My name is Ken Miller. I am the Director of Advocacy for an defense association called the Old Crows, which is electromagnetic spectrum operations. So some people who have been in the military might know what a crow is, or raven, but I do that, and then for that I have we have our own family of podcasts that we do. I host From the Crow's Nest. We have a history of crows, which kind of is a storytelling narrative about the history of our community. And then we do a Chief Technology Officer series, and then we also do a subscription service. And so we're looking to kind of build that, and that's, I already said the other reason why I'm here. So I just kind of want to build this out into the veteran area world.